In 4 weeks, Donald J. Trump will be sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. Until then, Barack Obama is still officially Commander-in-Chief. But unlike most other presidents in waiting, Trump has now jumped in with both feet into one of the most complicated and difficult foreign policy issues for any president, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As Elise Labott reports, the president-elect has been working the phones and calling world leaders to scuttle an anti-Israel resolution at the UN.
Tonight, a dispute over peace, politics, and the role of the U.S. presidency may be coming to a head at the United Nations. Just hours before the Security Council was set to vote for a resolution calling for Israel to stop building settlements, the ballot was abruptly cut off, averting a potential clash between the current and future U.S. presidents over U.S. relations with Israel.
We'll just have to wait and see what the results of those consultations are to see if the text moves forward.
The resolution demands Israel, quote, immediately and completely cease all settlement activities, calling it a flagrant violation under international law. CNN has learned that President Obama was prepared to let the resolution pass, either by abstaining or voting in favor of it. The U.S. has traditionally seen Jewish settlements in areas controlled by Palestinians as an obstacle to a peace process, but has never gone so far in a UN vote. The move today would have been seen by many as a provocation, a parting shot at Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with whom President Obama has strained ties. Around 3 a.m., Netanyahu took to Twitter, writing in English and appealing for a U.S. veto. But before the White House could announce its support for the resolution, this morning President-elect Donald Trump sent out this statement calling for a veto and saying peace between Israel and Palestinians needs to be negotiated, not, quote, through the imposition of terms by the United Nations. A senior Israeli official tells CNN the Israeli government reached out to Trump to weigh in after failing to persuade Washington to cancel the vote. Then Egyptian President Sisi, whose country offered the resolution, put the vote on hold after a call from Trump. Today, gratitude from Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer, who tweeted Israel, quote, deeply appreciates the clear and unequivocal call by Trump.
The United Nations is not a friend of democracy.
Trump's statement appeared to again signal his desire to shift U.S.-Israel relations. During the election, he said he would move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and he denounced UN involvement in the peace process in an interview with Wolf Blitzer.
This has to be a deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Trump says he wants to be seen as an honest broker in the Mideast.
I would love to be neutral if it's possible. It's probably not possible because there's so much hatred. There's so much going on.
Israeli officials argue that by allowing the resolution to go through at the United Nations, President Obama would be tying Donald Trump's hands once he takes office to negotiate what the president-elect has called the ultimate deal between Israelis and Palestinians. Elise Labott, CNN, the State Department.
Well, for more, joining us now, Democratic strategist Dave Jacobson, Republican consultant John Thomas, and international law and U.S. foreign policy lecturer Josh Lockman. Thank you all for being with us. Dave, first to you, how extraordinary is this split that we're looking at right now between the incoming administration and the outgoing administration on an issue like this, which is so crucial and one of the biggest foreign policy challenges for any administration?
Of course. There's no doubt it's unprecedented. I mean, the reality is there's a certain etiquette and level of respect that the incoming president should have with the outgoing president. According to the Constitution, Barack Obama is still president for a whole 29 more days, right? And so this, I think, really underscores the clash or the looming clash that we're seeing as President Obama starts to leave office and Donald Trump starts to come in. But I do think it really undermines the transition of power and the fact that President Obama is still commander-in-chief.
So, John, I mean, there is a tradition, one president at a time.
This is a major decision that Donald Trump is going to have to live with over the next 4 years. Donald Trump is a deal maker at his heart. Not just did he write the art of the deal, but this is something he's passionate about. He thinks the U.S. foreign policy is wrong in many instances, this being one of them. Look, Israel's excited about what he's weighing in, and I would expect this is Donald Trump will not be a shrinking violet now nor as president.
But I think the question is like how he handled it. Like if he really felt so passionately about this, perhaps like a private phone call to President Obama.
It's like Barack Obama passing last-minute executive orders banning offshore drilling. I mean, come on, what is he doing?
Okay, well, the Israelis may be excited, the Palestinians are not, so too many other Arab countries around the world. But Josh, to you, I want to look closer at the actual resolution which got pulled by the Egyptian president. The language seemed to be incredibly broad. If you looked at it closer, I guess in theory it meant that, East Jerusalem would be considered occupied territory, which would mean that, the old Jewish quarter in the old city, rather, as well as the Western Wall, would be off limits for Israelis.
Yeah, John, the resolution is quite broad, but largely comports with what the international community, including the United States, believes regarding Israel's settlements and its settlement building, which is that the settlements are illegal under international law, and every administration since the 1970s, Republican and Democratic alike, has espoused that view. It's important to note here, though, that had this American abstention gone forward, it's not without precedent. In the waning days of the Bush administration, before President Obama took office, the Bush administration abstained on a resolution that was calling for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas. So there would have been precedent here, and this may have been a parting shot by President Obama. It also may have been his desire to cement his position on the Israeli settlement building, which has been a contentious issue throughout his presidency.
I just want to say with what previous presidents have done, because there is a lot of criticism that Barack Obama has not been supportive enough of Israel, but the Obama administration has stopped every anti-Israeli resolution at the UN Security Council, unlike every president going back to Lyndon Johnson. I mean, Ronald Reagan, either approved or allowed to pass 21 resolutions. So it seems that if Obama had allowed this one to go through, it would have been quite the diplomatic message to Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, it would have been a strong signal to Bibi Netanyahu. They've obviously had an acrimonious relationship, Obama and Netanyahu, throughout the last 8 years. But I think also it kind of underscores the calculus that the president's demonstrated on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In 2011, the United States vetoed a similar resolution, and the main logic was that if this resolution were to go forward, it would be an impediment to the American mediation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself. Now that we've seen such a stalemate since 2014 in talks between Israel and the Palestinians, the calculus here may have been that the president wanted to cement his position that Israeli settlement building and continuous settlement building is an active obstacle on the Israeli side.
And John, I mean, there is this process here. You do have this president-elect making calls, picking up the phone, calling other world leaders, in this case, the Egyptian President al-Sisi. Again, it does not seem to be in keeping with what other presidents in waiting have done.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, President Obama is a lame duck. I mean, really, we're in what President-elect Trump thinks is dangerous times in the world, and we need a dramatic and quick shift in foreign policy. You saw that in his conversation with Taiwan. I think it's no different here.
You saw that with his tweet, though, today, right? Calling for more nukes all across.
We're going to get to that in a moment.
Right. But I just don't think the Obama administration has been no friend to Israel, and not just on issues with the UN. I mean, allowing Iran to get nuclear weapons or start the proliferation of it. Israel's scared to death. I'm sure they're welcoming this action by President-elect Trump.
Dave, you would argue that Obama is not a lame duck right now. He seems to be passing more executive orders right now.
He's letting felons out left and right.
I guess the question is, like, how does President Trump want to act and be president 4 years from now, hopefully, fingers crossed, when a Democrat is coming into the White House and there's this transitional period? Like, is Donald Trump going to think of himself as a lame duck and let the incoming president walk all over him? Those are real questions that need to be asked.
And Josh, all of this seemed to be tightly coordinated between the Knesset in Jerusalem and Mar-a-Lago, Trump's resort there in Florida. This is part of the Israeli Prime Minister's statement, which was released on Twitter. Listen to this.
I hope it will abide by the principles set by President Obama himself in his speech in the UN in 2011, that peace will come not through UN resolutions, but only through direct negotiations between the parties.
And just as a reminder, it's almost word for word what the president-elect posted on Facebook. As the United States has long maintained, peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians will only come through direct negotiations between parties and not through the imposition of terms by the United Nations. What will be the reaction in the Islamic world to this high level of coordination between the incoming president and the Israeli prime minister?
Well, it's a serious concern, John. It could be easily inflamed by the position that Trump is taking on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's important to note here that Trump's choice for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, could himself instigate and incite violence on the street. This is a person that's trafficked in hate and Islamophobia, and has also called for the dismissal or the discarding of the two-state solution. So Trump's position, which may bolster settlement building in Israel itself, is one that's really dangerous and reckless. It could absolutely lead to an inflammation of violence or even possibly a third intifada. So it's a huge concern going forward.
Okay, Josh, thanks for staying with us. Josh Lockman there, foreign policy expert, or international law expert as well. I want to move on now to the issue of nuclear weapons. The president-elect could also be rewriting more than half a century of foreign policy when it comes to nuclear capabilities. With just 140 characters, Donald Trump has suggested it was time to expand the U.S. nuclear arsenal, sparking fears of a Cold War-style arms race. Details from Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr.
Did Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump just have their first nuclear standoff? Today, Russia's president vowing more nuclear weapons are needed.
We need to strengthen the military potential of strategic nuclear forces, especially with missile complexes that can reliably penetrate any existing and prospective missile defense systems.
A clear shot at U.S. defense plans in Europe, something Russia believes is a threat. Within hours, President-elect Trump tweeted, quote, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." The two declarations raising the specter of an arms race renewed. Donald Trump briefed just yesterday by senior Air Force officers on the need to modernize the aging nuclear infrastructure. During the second presidential debate, a hint of his thinking.
Russia is new in terms of nuclear. We are old, we're tired, we're exhausted in terms of nuclear. A very bad thing.
Nuclear weapons are limited by treaty. Today, Russia has 7,300 warheads, the U.S. just over 6,900. The Obama administration gave up on the idea of a U.S. pledge for no first use of nuclear weapons, worried the idea could embolden Russia and China. U.S. dismantling of its own nuclear arsenal has slowed in recent years. Putin's nuclear vow came as he boasted of Russian military superiority after a year which saw successful Russian hacking of the Democratic National Committee by the Russian military, sustained airstrikes in Syria, and continued occupation of Crimea.
Today, we are stronger than any potential aggressor. I repeat, any aggressor.
The Trump transition team later issued a statement saying the president-elect was really referring to nuclear proliferation, trying to make sure nuclear weapons are kept out of the hands of terrorists and rogue nations. But it is still not entirely clear whether Mr. Trump supports more nuclear weapons. Barbara Starr, CNN, the Pentagon.
You know, Dave, it's one thing to use Twitter to get the message out, which I think everyone thinks is, kind of a good thing. It's new, it's novel, but there are some issues, maybe like nuclear annihilation, which require a little more nuance and depth that you don't get in 140 characters.
Right, it's jaw-dropping and downright scary and dangerous, and Donald Trump's Twitter account increasingly is becoming a national security threat. I mean, the reality is it's one thing to say something on Twitter when you're a candidate, it's another thing to do it when you're president-elect, but when you are actually sitting in the Oval Office as commander-in-chief, theoretically, you could start a war with 150 characters. It's scary.
You've got, first of all, it's refreshing to actually be able to hear from our president-elect, future president, directly rather than through mouthpieces. But furthermore, this illustrates the dramatic difference between the last administration and the current administration, not just using Twitter, but Barack Obama's idea of applying pressure to Putin is telling him to cut it out, okay? Donald Trump says, we're going to arm up. And it's not, Donald Trump understands that there's peace through strength. And so part of it is rebuilding our military and rebuilding our nuclear infrastructure.
Okay, you say the tweeting is refreshing. Maybe not if you're Lockheed Martin. They know about the power of a Trump tweet. The president-elect posted this. Based on the tremendous cost and cost overruns of the Lockheed Martin F-35, I've asked Boeing to price out a comparable F-18 Super Hornet, exclamation point. Next thing you know, $1.2 billion wiped off the value of Lockheed Martin shares. I mean, this tweeting about companies and all this, John, this seems to be a scandal in the waiting here, isn't it? You know, someone gets the inside information about what's happening, or they provoke a tweet, they cash it in, the shares go up, the shares go down.
You know, it's hard to speak for. It's hard for me to speak to that. I can tell you the other defense contractors that he's picked fights with over Air Force One and whatnot. I think it was Boeing. The stocks rebounded in 24 hours. Remember, Donald Trump has been elected to be the CEO and chairman of the board for the American people, and the people are going to benefit from a tweet like that are the taxpayers. So I'm not mad about it at all.
I guess, but if you look at like the Carrier, for example, like look, he's putting his thumb on the scale. He's picking winners and losers.
That's not true. He's competitively bidding it rather than listening to lobbyists.
This is one example, but the question is like, is he going to continue to pick winners and losers as president? And what kind of conflicts arise when whether or not it benefits the Trump organization?
And you can make a lot of money in 24 hours if you know which way the share price is going to go. I want to finish up on what happened with Ivanka Trump on that JetBlue flight today. She was there with her kids and her husband, and a passenger who was eventually removed from the flight basically abused her, you know, yelling her about her father, Donald Trump. Everyone seems to agree that this guy is a total moron, and it's good that he was taken off. But you know, a lot of people have raised the question, what is, you know, Ivanka Trump, a successful businesswoman, daughter of a billionaire, soon to be first daughter, her father's about to be president. What is she doing flying on a commercial airline, flying on a budget commercial airline, and sitting in coach?
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I saw the story, although I got to say, I've flown JetBlue. It's not that bad.
Yeah. But I don't have billions of dollars.
They do have a lot of legroom, John. But
what about Trump Force One?
Yeah, exactly. But I think the bigger takeaway here, besides flying coach, which is still a head scratcher, is the left's obsession. They can't get over that Donald Trump is the president, and they're not just taking out on Donald Trump, they're taking out on his family. I mean, Ivanka Trump is arguably, you know, one of the shining examples that people look to as going, hey, he was a really good dad, he raised a good kid.
This is one thing that we can agree on as Democrats and Republicans. It's disturbing. She wasn't on the ballot. It was her dad. She's not saying these sexist, misogynistic things that he said throughout the last 2 years.
Leave the families alone.
Yeah,
right,
of course.
Precisely.
Okay. On that note, we shall leave it there. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.